welcome to the show. For nearly 500 years, one name has haunted every major turning point in history. From the fall of monarchies to the rise of empires, from the Great Fire to world-shaking terrorist attacks, the shadow of his prophecies seems to loom over them all. He was Michel de Nostradamus, but we know him as Nostradamus. A 16th-century French doctor who left behind a bizarre book of prophecies for the future, the Prophecies. These 942 four-line poems, or quatrains, are cryptic and full of riddles. Are they truly divine visions, or just a clever word game that can be interpreted any way you want? Today, we're diving deep into the mists of history to give you the complete breakdown of the enduring mystery of Nostradamus. To understand Nostradamus's prophecies, you first have to understand the man himself. He wasn't born a mystic. Michel de Nostradamus was born into a family that had converted from Judaism to Catholicism to escape religious persecution. This outsider status might have sealed his fate of lifelong caution and secrecy. He received the best education of his time, studying the 7 liberal arts at the University of Avignon before moving on to the prestigious medical school at the University of Montpellier. Historical records show that as a young man, he already displayed a stunning scientific rationality. He once explained to his classmates that meteors were sulfurous gas ignited by the wind, and firmly believed the Earth was round, earning him the nickname, the Little Astronomer. But his greatest achievement in life was as a plague doctor. In an age when the Black Death was emptying out Europe, his treatments were nothing short of revolutionary. He rejected the popular practice of bloodletting, instead emphasizing hygiene, fresh air, and clean drinking water. These methods saved countless lives and earned him immense prestige. It was this reputation as a man of science that became a shield for his later, more dangerous career in prophecy. When a doctor who could conquer the plague claimed he could also see the future, it was hard for people not to pay attention. But this also put him under constant threat from the Inquisition. Legend has it that, away from his medical practice, he would retreat to his study at night, using a brass bowl filled with water to meditate and enter a trance-like state to receive visions of the future. These visions would eventually form the basis of his life's work, the Prophecies. The way this book was written is extremely unique and highly intentional. The entire book is made up of nearly 1,000 four-line poems, but the language isn't pure French. It's a mix of Latin, Greek, Italian, and other languages. He used tons of anagrams and mythological references, and most importantly, the order of all the prophecies was completely scrambled. This wasn't just to be mysterious, it was a sophisticated form of self-preservation. In an era where making a clear prediction could get you burned at the stake, being vague was the only way to survive. Now, let's get to the core of our discussion today and witness for ourselves the hits that made Nostradamus a legend. And it all started with the death of a king. In 1559, King Henry II of France held a grand jousting tournament to celebrate a peace treaty. During the competition, the lance of his opponent, the Comte de Montgomery, who was 6 years his junior, unexpectedly shattered, and a splinter pierced the king's gilded helmet visor, lodging in his eye and temple. After 10 days of unimaginable agony, Henry II died a cruel death. All of France was in shock. And that's when people opened the Prophecies, published a few years earlier, and found a chillingly accurate quatrain. Let me read you this poem, from Century I, Quatrain 35. The young lion will overcome the older one, / on the field of combat in a single battle, / he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage, / 2 wounds made one, then he dies a cruel death. To show you just how stunningly these things line up, let's compare the poem to the historical facts, one by one. First, The historical fact is that the opponent was 6 years younger than the king. The poem corresponds with "The young lion will overcome the older one." The age comparison is a perfect match. Second, the event was a jousting tournament. The poem corresponds with "On the field of combat in a single battle." The nature of the event matches. Next, the historical fact is that the lance pierced the king's gilded helmet. The poem corresponds with "He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." Golden cage is seen as a brilliant metaphor for the king's ornate helmet. Then, the king was wounded in the eye and temple. The poem corresponds with "Two wounds made one." Two fatal wounds led to the same outcome, death. Finally, the king died after 10 days of torment. The poem corresponds with "Then he dies a cruel death," a pretty accurate description of the dying process. Every single image aligns perfectly with reality. And the most crucial part is that this poem was published before the event happened. Overnight, Nostradamus went from being a respected doctor to a feared prophet, earning the lifelong protection of Queen Catherine de' Medici. 2 centuries later, France was in turmoil again. And Nostradamus's verses seem to echo once more. Let's look at these 2 prophecies that span the centuries. Regarding the French Revolution, there's a poem that goes, "From the enslaved people, songs, chants and demands, while princes and lords are held captive in prisons, these will in the future, by headless idiots, be received as divine prayers." Here, the enslaved is interpreted as the oppressed Third Estate, prisons points directly to the Bastille, and headless idiots is seen as Nostradamus's sarcastic take on the revolutionary leaders from an aristocratic viewpoint. And when it comes to the rise of Napoleon, Nostradamus seems to have played a word game. In Century 8, Quatrain, he wrote, "Pau, nay, Laurent, more of fire than of the blood." These 3 seemingly unrelated French towns, Pau, nay, Laurent, if you rearrange their letters, what do you get? Napoleon Roy, which sounds strikingly similar to Napoleon the King in French. And "more of fire than of the blood" has been perfectly interpreted to mean that Napoleon was a commoner, not of noble blood, who rose to power through personal ambition and a military coup, in other words, fire. From precise descriptions of social classes to jaw-dropping wordplay, these verses seem to have once again captured the pulse of history. But was this just a coincidence, or a carefully designed puzzle? If the previous prophecies were merely thought-provoking, this next name sent a chill down the spines of countless believers. It points to the darkest chapter of the 20th century. This prophecy about Hister is at the very heart of the controversy. Believers think that Nostradamus wrote in a poem, "From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child will be born of poor people, he who by his tongue will seduce a great troop, his fame will increase towards the realm of the East." This is believed to have accurately predicted Hitler's origins, his oratorical skills, and his alliance with Japan. And another poem is even more direct: "The greater part of the region will be against Hister, when the child of Germany observes nothing." The name Hister, just 1 letter off from Hitler, is seen as a direct naming, and when you add the phrase, "child of Germany," it seems undeniable. However, historians point to a completely different possibility. Hister, in classical Latin, is the name for the lower Danube River. For a scholar like Nostradamus, who was well versed in classical literature, using this ancient name would be perfectly normal. Hitler just happened to be born near the Danube River, but this could be a stunning coincidence. This perfectly illustrates the central debate surrounding Nostradamus. Are these shocking prophecies, or are they coincidences that have been retrofitted by later generations? Remember this question, because next, we're going to see how it was exploited to the extreme in a modern-day hoax. On September 11, 2001, tragedy struck. Within hours, a prophecy supposedly from Nostradamus spread like wildfire through emails across the globe. 2 steel birds will fall from the sky on the metropolis. The third big war will begin when the big city is burning. The poem was so specific, so precise, that it instantly convinced countless people who were in shock and looking for an explanation. But, it was a complete and utter hoax. Investigations revealed that the core of this poem was actually written by a Canadian college student in 1997, with the specific goal of showing how easily prophecies can be faked and retrofitted. He mixed Nostradamus's style with pure fiction, never imagining that 4 years later, it would be taken as fact. So, were there any related prophecies in the real prophecies? Believers quickly found the verse they were looking for. Century 6, Quatrain 97, the sky will burn at 45 degrees, fire approaches the great new city. But this interpretation is also full of holes. New York's latitude isn't 45 degrees, and new city, Site Neuf, is an extremely commonplace name in Europe. And here, we see the real secret to how the Nostradamus legend continues in the 21st century. A strange symbiotic relationship between vague, authentic verses and specific, modern forgeries. People are drawn to Nostradamus by the shock value of the fakes, and then they go looking for words in his real, vague texts that can be retroactively matched to events. This feedback loop, built on misunderstanding and fabrication, constantly breathes new life into this ancient legend. We've heard about the stunning hits. But to get the full picture of Nostradamus, we have to examine his most famous, and most undeniable, failure. Century X, Quatrain 72, is extremely rare among the prophecies. It gives a specific date, the year 1999, 7th month, from the sky will come a great king of terror to bring back to life the great king of the Mongols, before and after Mars to reign by good luck. The whole world was waiting. The media hyped it up, and interpretations were all over the place. And then, July 1999 came and went peacefully. No undisputed king of terror descended from the sky. This quatrain is the Achilles heel of the Nostradamus legend. Precisely because its date was so specific, later generations couldn't easily reinterpret it or retrofit it to an event. Its failure provides skeptics with their strongest piece of evidence. When Nostradamus's prophecies are clear and testable, they tend to be wrong. The failure of 1999 opens a new door for us. The door of skepticism. Critics, led by the famous magician and investigator James Randi, have given us a toolkit for deconstructing these prophecies. The tools used by skeptics can be boiled down to a few key points. First, vague language. The wording of the prophecies is extremely broad, full of symbols and metaphors, making them applicable to countless historical events. Second, post-diction. The prophecies are never clearly interpreted before an event. They are always retroactively fitted to events that have already happened. This is more like after-the-fact explaining than foretelling. Third, translation issues. 16th-century Old French is hard enough to translate, but Nostradamus also mixed in multiple languages, leading to vastly different versions, which gives interpreters space to pick whatever suits their narrative. And the most powerful tool, from psychology, confirmation bias. This is a psychological phenomenon where people tend to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms their existing beliefs, while ignoring contradictory evidence. Believers focus on the few hits while ignoring the hundreds of failed verses. Once you have these tools, you can look at the Nostradamus legend from a completely new perspective. Let's use a side-by-side comparison to sum up this difference. When the poem mentions Hister, the prophet believer says, this is Hitler. But the historian says, this is the classical Latin name for the Danube River. When the poem mentions New City, the prophet believer says, this is New York. But the historian says, there are countless places in Europe with this name. When the poem mentions Pau, nay, Laron, the prophet believer says, this is an anagram for King Napoleon. But the historian says, these are 3 real towns in southwestern France. The anagram is just a leap of interpretation. When the poem mentions King of Terror, the prophet believer says, this is the Antichrist. But the linguist says, the word can also mean fright or alarm, and its context is mythological, not necessarily literal. Through this comparison, the mysterious veil of Nostradamus's prophecies seems to be lifting, layer by layer. Now that we've uncovered the historical truth, let's come back to the present day. You may have seen online that Nostradamus also has prophecies for 2025. These interpretations for 2025 can be summarized into a few key areas, and they tap directly into our modern collective anxieties. First is war in Europe. The poem mentions, a cruel war will break out between European powers and England, which gets linked to current international conflicts. Second is the climate crisis. Descriptions of parched earth, and great floods, in the poem echo our worries about global warming and food security. There's also a new plague. The poem predicts an ancient pestilence will reappear, calling it a threat, more fatal than any enemy, which strikes a nerve in our post-pandemic world. Finally, economic collapse. Warnings of financial collapse and evaporating wealth also align with the current global economic situation. But we have to point out that these are, once again, interpretations that fit vague verses to our current anxieties. Just like the previous predictions for 2024, such as, the Pope will be replaced, or, Prince Harry will become king, all failed to happen, which just reinforces the pattern of failure. So, after all this, how should we view Nostradamus? Is he a prophet, a poet, or a mirror reflecting our own fears? This might be the real secret to why he's remained famous for nearly 5 centuries. His work is like a timeless, universal, Rorschach test. It has no fixed shape. What we see is actually a projection of our own deepest anxieties. Every generation can find its greatest fears in his vague verses. His power isn't predictive, it's reflective. His work is a vessel that holds our own anxieties. When we fear war, we find verses about war. When we fear plague, verses about plague emerge. The prophecies for 2025 are popular precisely because they touch on our current global concerns about the world situation, climate change, and unknown diseases. Perhaps the value of Nostradamus isn't in telling us what the future holds, but in reminding us that humanity has always faced the same challenges. And to face these challenges, what we need is always reason and cooperation, not superstition. So, was Nostradamus a true prophet, a gifted poet, or simply a wise man who deeply understood history and human weakness, and knew they were bound to repeat? The answer, much like his prophecies, remains open for everyone to interpret. What do you think? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.